The Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic text that is not included in the Hebrew Bible, but it had a significant influence on early Christianity and eschatology. Written in Ge'ez, Ethiopian, and estimated to date from the 3rd to 1st centuries BCE, the book is associated with the figure of Enoch, the seventh ancestor of Adam who was raised to heaven, according to Genesis 5, verse 24. The Book of Enoch describes in detail how Enoch was taken by angels to 7 layers of heaven, each with different functions and creatures. In the first heaven, he saw a prison for stars that had broken divine rules, and in the 4th to 7th heavens, he witnessed the infinite glory of the Most Holy. Enoch was also shown the place of torment for fallen angels, watchers, and for sinful human souls, an early depiction of the concept of hell. One of the most striking parts is the description of Sheol, the waiting place for souls, which is divided into 4 chambers, for the righteous, martyrs, the sinful who have not yet been judged, and the sinful who have been condemned. This provided the structural basis for the concept of paradise versus hell that later developed in Christianity. This book was highly revered in the Qumran community. Dead Sea Scrolls and quotations from it appear in Jude 1 verse 14 to 15 in the New Testament, demonstrating its enormous influence. However, major churches later excluded it from the official Bible because it was considered too apocalyptic and laden with non-canonical cosmology. The Book of Enoch is an early blueprint for the concept of heaven and hell as a multi-tiered reality and place of eternal punishment before it developed in Christian and Islamic doctrine. The Apocalypse of Peter. The Apocalypse of Peter is one of the earliest Christian apocryphal texts dating from around the 2nd century CE. This manuscript is not included in the biblical canon, but it was very popular among the early churches and has been found in several versions, Greek, Egyptian, and Ethiopian Ge'ez. Some early communities even considered including it in the Holy Scriptures before it was eventually replaced by the revelation of John. The main content of the manuscript is a revelation received by the Apostle Peter from Jesus concerning the end of time and the condition of the human soul after death. What makes it remarkable is its extremely detailed and graphic descriptions of the torments of hell, far more detailed than those found in the book of Revelation. Specific sins are paired with specific torments, a format that would influence Dante's monumental work, The Divine Comedy, centuries later. In contrast, heaven is depicted as a garden full of flowers and light, where the righteous sing and drink the water of life. However, the main focus of this manuscript is on the visual and emotional consequences of morality, not merely doctrine. Historical sources such as the Muratorian Fragment, an early document on the canon of the Bible, mention this manuscript and indicate that it was taken seriously in early Christian communities. The Apocalypse of Peter was one of the first manuscripts to describe hell and heaven not as abstract spiritual concepts, but as concrete realities that could be experienced, complete with pain and pleasure. This manuscript formed the basis of popular imagination about the afterlife for centuries. The Zohar. The Zohar is the primary text of the Jewish Kabbalah tradition that emerged in the 13th century CE in Spain, although it is claimed to be the work of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai from the 2nd century. Written in Aramaic and Hebrew, the Zohar is a mystical commentary on the Torah and reveals esoteric views of the universe, God, the human soul, and, crucially, the structure of the spiritual realm, including heaven, Gan Eden, and hell, Gehenna. According to the Zohar, reality consists of multiple layers and spiritual dimensions that interact with each other. Heaven is not a single place, but a hierarchy of consciousness and closeness to Ein Sof, the infinite divine source. After death, the human soul ascends or descends within these dimensions, depending on its spiritual purity. Hell in the Zohar is not eternal torment, as in medieval Christian concepts. What is called Gehenna is a temporary place of purification, usually lasting 12 months, where souls are burned of their sins through spiritual, not physical, suffering. After that, most souls ascend to Gan Eden, except for those who are truly evil. The Zohar also introduces the idea of Gilgul, or reincarnation, which means that souls can return to the physical world to perfect themselves. Thus, heaven and hell in the Zohar are not final destinations, but part of a dynamic process of spiritual perfection. This book presents a highly complex and symbolic view of heaven and hell as metaphysical realities that reflect the inner state of the soul, rather than mere physical locations. It marks a shift from legalistic religion to deep spiritual experience and became the basis for much of Western mystical thought. The Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is an epic poem by Dante Alighieri, written between 1308 and 1320, towards the end of his life. Written in Italian rather than Latin, it revolutionized medieval Christian understanding of the afterlife, specifically heaven, paradiso, hell, inferno, and purgatory, purgatorio. It is not only a work of literature, but also a theological, philosophical, and political document. In Inferno, Dante describes his spiritual journey through hell, which consists of 9 circles, each inhabited by souls punished according to their sins, such as greed, lust, treachery, and murder. Interestingly, the torments in each circle are not merely metaphors, but are described in great detail and realistically: endless storms, rain of fire, and eternal freezing. In the Purgatorio section, repentant souls pass through 7 levels of purification to reach heaven based on the 7 deadly sins. At the end of the journey in Paradiso, Dante ascends to the 9 heavenly heavens, representing the planets, and ends up in the presence of God in the Empyrean, a world of pure light. Although rooted in Catholic theology, Dante also incorporated Aristotelian philosophy, the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, and the astronomical knowledge of his time. Many historical and mythological figures are woven into the narrative, from Julius Caesar to the Prophet Muhammad, a controversial inclusion to this day. Although the Divine Comedy is not a canonical religious text, it has been a major source of Western imagination about hell and heaven for centuries. It shaped the moral architecture of the modern Christian world, creating a visual, logical, and deeply human picture of hell as a system of divine justice. Bardo Thodol. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, or in its original language Bardo Thodol, Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate State, is a sacred text of Tibetan Buddhism written around the 8th century by Padmasambhava, an important figure in the spread of Vajrayana to Tibet. This text is not only a spiritual guide for facing death, but also maps the experience of consciousness after death, including unique versions of heaven and hell. In this teaching, after a person dies, they enter the Bardo phase, which is the realm between death and rebirth. Bardo is divided into several stages that last for 49 days. During this period, consciousness, which does not yet have a physical body, experiences various visions that reflect its own mental state. These include visions of light deities, heaven and frightening beings, and torments, hell. Importantly, all of these experiences are not objective or permanent, but rather manifestations of one's karma and mental state. The soul can be reincarnated, enter a lower realm, such as hell, or achieve enlightenment and freedom from the cycle of samsara if it succeeds in recognizing the truth of these illusions. Many experts consider this text not to be an ordinary death script, but rather a highly complex psychospiritual guide. Carl Jung himself studied this text and considered it the key to understanding the human subconscious. The Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches that heaven and hell are not eternal places, but states of mind that consciousness encounters after death. This is one of the most radical views, that suffering and happiness in the afterlife can be overcome with consciousness and knowledge, not just faith or deeds. Kitab ar-ruh. Kitab ar-ruh is a classic work by the great Islamic scholar Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya, 1292 to 1350 AD, a student of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. This book is very famous in Islamic tradition because it discusses in depth the ruh, soul, after death. From the process of its removal, the realm of Barzakh, to its fate in heaven, Jannah, or hell, Jahannam. This manuscript is not an ordinary tafsir or fiqh book, but rather a spiritual exploration based on the Quran, authentic hadiths, and the thoughts of the Salafus Shali. One of its central concepts is Barzakh, the intermediate realm between this world and the hereafter, where the soul resides until the day of judgment. In Kitab ar-ruh, Ibn Qayyim explains that the soul of a believer will be welcomed by angels with a shroud from heaven and carried up through the heavens, witnessed by the angels. The souls of disbelievers or sinners will be rejected by the heavens, thrown back to earth, and placed in the realm of Barzakh in a state of torment. He also details the interactions between souls in the realm of Barzakh, that the souls of good people can visit and talk to each other, while evil souls are imprisoned in spiritual prisons. This text has strong references. Many hadiths in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim form the basis of its understanding. This makes it one of the most influential Islamic texts in describing the afterlife in detail. It not only explains heaven and hell as final destinations, but also opens up an important discourse, how the journey of the soul from the moment of death is a structured and meaningful spiritual process, not simply black and white. Pistis Sophia. Pistis Sophia is one of the most important Gnostic texts found in Coptic, estimated to date from the 3rd or 4th century CE. The manuscript is part of the Corpus Gnosticum and was most likely written by followers of Valentinianism, a Christian Gnostic sect. The title means faith and wisdom, two central concepts in Gnostic teachings. Its main content is a long conversation between Jesus and his disciples after the resurrection, especially Mary Magdalene. However, this is no ordinary conversation. Jesus here does not merely explain morality or law, but reveals the structure of the spiritual cosmos, including the levels of heaven, the realm of purification, and the dark entities that prevent souls from returning to the divine source. Heaven and Pistis. Sophia is not a single place, but multi-tiered, called the treasure of light, the place of origin of pure spirits. The human soul is believed to originate from this world of light, but fell into the material realm. Sophia, a female divine being, is a symbol of the fallen soul, captured by the force of darkness called the archons, the rulers of the lower dimensions. Hell in this text is not depicted as a place of physical torment, but rather a dark dimension full of illusions and spiritual suffering due to separation from divine light. Unconscious souls remain trapped there. To escape this cycle, souls must realize divine truth, gnosis, and pass through stages of heaven guarded by entities that can only be traversed with codes, divine songs, or spiritual mantras taught by Jesus himself. Pistis Sophia offers a complex and symbolic spiritual map where heaven and hell are not external places, but levels of consciousness and purity of the soul. This text shifts the focus of salvation from dogmatic faith to deep inner knowledge, a very radical approach in the context of early Christianity. Popol Vuh. Popol Vuh is the sacred book of the Quiche Maya people of Guatemala, rewritten by indigenous authors in the 16th century using the Latin alphabet after the Spanish conquest. Although it takes the form of a mythological and cosmological narrative, Popol Vuh is a primary source on the spiritual beliefs of the Maya, including their concepts of the afterlife, both heaven and hell. In this text, the underworld or hell is called Xibalba, pronounced Xibalba, which literally means place of fear. Xibalba is a kingdom of darkness located far below the earth, ruled by two gods of death, Hunkame and Vukubkame. This hell is not only a place of passive torture, but is filled with cruel traps and houses of trials, such as the House of Darkness, completely without light, the House of Knives, filled with sharp blades, the House of Cold, covered in snow and ice, the House of Fire, a place where souls are burned, and the House of Jaguars, full of wild animals. In the main story, the heroic twin gods Hunahpu and Ixbalanca descend to Xibalba to challenge the rulers of hell. As part of a narrative of rebirth and redemption for the world, they defeat the gods of darkness through cunning, self-sacrifice, and resurrection, symbols of spiritual transformation. In contrast, heaven in Mayan tradition is more abstract. Called Tamuanchan, it is the home of the gods and the origin of humanity. However, the main focus of the Popol Vuh is how the trials in the underworld are a prerequisite for the transformation of the soul, not merely a punishment. The Popol Vuh teaches that hell is not just a place of punishment, but an arena of initiation where courage, awareness, and sacrifice guide the soul toward a new birth. This makes the text unique among ancient texts. Hell is a spiritual stage, not the end of everything. The Egyptian Book of the Dead. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a collection of funerary texts written in hieroglyphics used by the ancient Egyptians from around 1550 BC to 50 BC. Also known as the Book of the Dead, coming forth by day. It is not a single book, but a compilation of spells, prayers, and spiritual instructions written on papyrus and placed in tombs to guide the soul after death. At the heart of these teachings is the journey of the soul through the realm of the dead duat, which is full of obstacles, strange creatures, and final judgment. One of the most famous parts is the trial of Osiris, in which the heart of the deceased is weighed against the feather of Mayat, symbol of truth and justice. If the heart is lighter, the soul is considered pure and entitled to enter the field of reeds, the peaceful and eternal Egyptian version of heaven. However, if the heart is heavier due to sins, the soul will be devoured by Ammit, a hybrid creature with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the legs of a hippopotamus. This is a form of total spiritual destruction more terrifying than eternal hell. The soul is not tortured, but erased from existence. In Egyptian concepts, this is worse than suffering. This text is full of protective spells, such as spell 125, which describes negative confessions, such as, I did not steal, I did not kill, I did not bear false witness. This is a highly systematic and profound form of moral declaration. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a highly structured spiritual text, depicting heaven as an ideal continuation of life and hell as the destruction of identity. It is one of the oldest texts in the world to provide technical guidance for the soul, making death not an end, but a moral and spiritual test. Bhagavad Gita and Garuda Purana. In Hindu tradition, the understanding of heaven and hell is not eternal, but rather part of the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Samsara. Two important texts that discuss this in depth are the Bhagavad Gita and the Garuda Purana. Bhagavad Gita, part of the Mahabharata, written around the 2nd century BCE, is a dialogue between Prince Arjuna and the god Krishna. The Gita emphasizes that what happens after death depends on karma, actions, and bhakti, devotion to God. Heaven is called Svarga Loka, a place where souls receive rewards for good deeds, but it is not eternal. Once the rewards are exhausted, the soul is reborn. Meanwhile, the Garuda Purana, one of the 18 major Puranas written around the 4th to 5th century CE, presents graphic details about hell, Naraka, which is said to have 28 types of hell, each for specific sins. For example, Tamisra, for thieves, souls are shackled in total darkness. Kumbhipaka, for murderers and deceivers, souls are boiled in hot oil. Raurava, for those who torture others, punished by terrifying creatures. However, like heaven, hell in Hinduism is not an eternal place. It is merely a temporary phase before the soul is reborn into the world. Purification through suffering or reward is part of the spiritual evolution of the soul towards moksha, absolute liberation from the cycle of rebirth.